Connolly, the profession, and there's Peter Connolly, the person, and the sort of the overlap, of course. I'm very much a person who's interested in people.
Very good.
I have been probably since I can remember, really, what it is that makes people tick. Initially through sport, things like snooker, for example, that was my early passion. I come from Dundalk originally, and I've lived in different parts of the world. Essentially, now in terms of trade and training, I'm a mental health occupational therapist, which is an ideal profession for somebody who's interested in people, because it's a very people-oriented profession.
Okay. And what were you like as a child?
Well, for me, I was always a child that wanted to move a lot. I had a lot of energy.
Very good.
I was into various sports, into soccer, into sort of climbing, and so I was always kind of into fitness and developing strength. And even though I wasn't necessarily big myself, but I could see the value. I got into snooker in a big way when I was sort of probably from about the age of 11, and that became my main primary sport. And outside of school, that would have dominated my main interests in terms of what I did with my time, and it sort of really got me focused on how do we unlock a potential, the importance of having something to focus on, having a practice, how activities themselves can provide a lot of growth. Sport can be a great avenue for personal development and meeting new people and developing as a person. So I learned a lot in my early years in terms of the things I naturally gravitated towards, and those are still lifelong passions, to be fair.
Good man. I do remember there was a boom in snooker in Ireland after Dennis Taylor won the World Championship in 1985, and snooker halls opened the length and breadth of the country. And I played a bit of snooker myself. My highest break was 25. I had to pot the green, the brown, blue, pink, and black to win a frame by 1 point. And I did it. But I never got near 25 again. So may I ask you, what was your highest break at snooker?
I would have been getting multiple centuries, when I was a young guy. About 125 would be my highest, I think, But I probably got to a stage where I actually gave up when I was about 16.
All right.
So I actually have stopped playing. I've stopped playing longer than I actually played. I only really played for about 4 years, to be fair. And still, even around Dundalk, people still know me as somebody who played snooker. But, I've given up the game over 25 years ago,
All right. Fair play to you. 125 break is very respectable. And to do multiple centuries in your teens is nothing to be ashamed of. It's something to be admired and to be proud of. So well done to you. Peter, can you explain for the audience, what is mental health occupational therapy?
Okay. Well, an occupational therapist is a clinically trained health professional. So we have to go to university for up to 4 years to train. And we work within the healthcare system. So we're experts really in terms of occupation. So what does occupation really mean? Well, occupations are the things that we do that are meaningful and purposeful for our lives. They're the things that make up our day, if you like, but there are skills behind those occupations, the practical things we need and want to be able to do. And there's a correlationship between what we do and health. It's essential for anyone's day-to-day life. We're very much interested in maintaining people's occupations. So obviously in mental health, my focus is on, what it is that people do, but also how to do what they do and how that relates to their mental health. And we know that when people experience things like depression or anxiety, there may be a disruption in some of those occupations. For example, getting out of bed might be more difficult, or sustaining well-being at work might be difficult, or being able to focus and concentrate might be difficult. So we're very much orientated in what people do, but actually the underlying skills behind them, and trying to get the best match possible with our environments and their occupations themselves, like the way you do things. So if you think about it, John, the way people do their jobs, and you break it down, why do you do it like that? Like, why do we hold meetings like that? Why do we do lots of things the way we do them? And we can redesign them so they're a better fit for people. And, they can meet more diverse needs. A lot of jobs are done almost in the way that we we go to school, sit down, be quiet, focus for long periods of time. But there's not a lot of evidence to support that that's a good way of doing things. That's just habits that people have acquired over the years. So a lot of it's around education and redesigning how people do things. So that supports well-being, but also supports performance.
And I think if you use the snooker analogy, going back to professional days in snooker, Steve Davis dominated the 1980s, and then Stephen Hendry was the dominant player in the 1990s. But all of a sudden, if you remember, in 1997, Ken Doherty got to the final, and he wasn't expected to win against Stephen Hendry pretty comprehensively. So obviously Ken got tuition along the way. And when he got to the final, his whole mindset was right. He believed in his own mind, I'm going to win today. I don't care what the media says, what's in the papers, what the public think. I'm going to go out there and beat Stephen Hendry. So he obviously had got the benefit of, say, an occupational therapist to help him in terms of his mental preparation, his practice.
Yeah,
we worked with a coach in terms of getting his stance right at the snooker table, working on his technique. So that's just using the snooker analogy, I suppose, for occupational therapy.
Yeah, and if you go staying with that as an example, someone like Ken was very much shaped by his environment. There was lots of things going on within the Dublin snooker scene and in Ireland with a very strong amateur scene, and a lot of great players around at that time that really helped Ken, to be fair. And he made a lot of sacrifices in his life to become the champion that he became, and he believed in himself. He created the mindset. He imagined winning well before he actually won that world title.
Yeah, and I think the same happens in professional rugby. When people are, let's say, Johnny Sexton, for example, if he's taking a penalty kick or a conversion, he has to get the image in his own mind.
Yeah.
No matter how difficult that kick is, I'm going to get 2 or 3 points, whether it's for a penalty or for the conversion. Yeah, so they have to have positive mental imagery in their minds at all stages.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's a big thing. That skill of being able to imagine doing something before you do it and being able to focus under pressure. Like, these are mental skills that really unlock people's potential. So you could be very good at something, but if your focus wanders, or you become very distracted under pressure or become dysregulated, of course all that talent goes out the window. And these are the skills that not just athletes but non-athletes need to really kind of train and practice, so they can kind of do the things that they need to do, whether that's under pressure or in more distracting scenarios.
And again, if you take it to the work scenario, where, for example, you have managers who are in charge of meetings, and all they want to hear is their own voice, and they wonder why there's no input from the other team members of the meeting then, because they have too much control. If they're told by an occupational therapist, for example, take a step back, give somebody else the opportunity to chair the meetings, then you'll get buy-in from your team.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, as occupational therapists, we're all about empowering people.
Yeah.
We would probably rarely tell people, like what to do. We would sort of maybe inquire and hopefully come up with a way of the person might discover that themselves, or come up with different ways of experimenting with holding a meeting. So then they would learn by doing it themselves, and discover those scenarios. We all like to learn and discover things. Very rarely do we like to get things pointed out to us. That can be quite difficult for particularly a leader. If they're open to that and they're humble enough, that's a great quality, of course. And great leaders are often very humble, and will often be looking at tweaking how to do things, and particularly, empowering other people to step into their inner leader as well. I mean, that's often a good sign of a leader, isn't it?
I think what you're saying there is that occupational therapists are very much like coaches. They don't provide the solution for the person they're working with. They give the person the opportunity to identify the solution themselves by opening their minds to other opportunities.
Yeah. It's a good way of framing, because actually in healthcare, if you think about it, if you think about the mix of a team, So you might have, say, in mental health, you might have an occupational therapist, you might have a psychiatrist, a junior doctor, and maybe a social worker and a psychologist.
Yeah.
The occupational therapist often kind of, is the practical, the creative one, and maybe more, it sort of looks like more like a coach. So they're often a little bit more holistic.
Very good.
It's certainly rooted in the practicalities of what people need and want to be able to do.
Very good. By tuning into our senses, can you describe how we can turn a neutral experience into a more nourishing and pleasant experience?
Well, that's a good question. It obviously comes a lot from, being more mindful in our everyday life and what we call turning off automatic pilots. So when we're kind of just habitually doing things, we become quite automated, and experiences just don't really feel particularly nourishing or enjoyable. We do them, and maybe we do them so often, they lose the magic, if you like. So say, for example, I've just made a cup of coffee. I've made thousands of cups of coffee in my day, but if I tune in to the smell of it, the taste of it, I engage with it on a deeper level. Yeah. But also, if I actually step back and think about it, well, what did it take for this coffee to get to my home? There was lots of people involved. There was people that I may never meet from different parts of the world, and actually beginning to appreciate something just by tapping into, being able to shift our attention to our senses. So it sort of almost sort of reignites that this is quite a special thing that we're doing, and it can be quite grateful for. So our senses are always in the present, and if we tune into them, obviously we have 5 senses that we'd all be typically kind of aware of, sight, smell, taste, and touch. Being able to tune into them really sort of turns it into a more nourishing activity, and you can apply that to lots of things, and it just is a way of adding a little bit of well-being to your day as you go about your day.
Good point there. And I think what you're saying in a work sense, and it applies to me, when I worked as an accountant, the word task just turned me cold.
Yeah.
If you said to me, now, John, I've got a project here to give to you, and straight away, I'm all excited. I'm up for the constructive challenge. I'm going to get out of my comfort zone. I'm going to embrace this. I'm going to, that's a more nourishing and pleasant experience as far as I'm concerned, because I'm taking on something meaningful and not just crunching numbers for the sake of crunching numbers.
Yeah. And it shows you, John, that the power of words, doesn't it? The power of language.
Yeah.
And how words can mean different things to us. Just like they mean different things in the dictionary, they also mean different things to us. And we might have if you're managing somebody, there might be particular ways of phrasing something that just might feel more meaningful to somebody, and they might get a bit more inspired about it. Very
good. Explain how the voice of the inner critic can gain power over us.
It's a great point. I don't know if you remember the books by Timothy Galway, The Inner Game and The Inner Game of Golf, The Inner Game of Work. And, it was one of those early books around sports psychology. And for the lay person, if you like. And it talked about a simple formula: potential minus interference equals performance. So there's a lot happens between the inner ears. So we have this amazing ability as human beings to give ourselves advice, to make assumptions, to kind of have a dialogue with ourselves about things. So we sort of learn from our mistakes, from our experiences. So we don't just go around repeating the same mistakes over and over and over again. So it's both an amazing ability that can kind of work for us or work against it, because it tends to have a negative bias for survival reasons. So often that inner dialogue, which we'll call self-talk, if you like, we'll put a word on it, self-talk. It can take the tone, and the tone of it is very important. The tone and the words. So the words typically are more negative, and the tone can be more critical and more judgmental. So that's like somebody putting you off, pointing out the things that you maybe didn't do well enough that day or could have done better, or negatively comparing yourself to other people. We need to be able to shift that. We need to be able to counter that and move it more to a coach, because we have this ability. It's related to our working memory. It's not going to go away. You can't take a tablet to make it go away. You need to learn to manage it and shift our attention and be able to flex it so it's more of a coach than a critic. So it's okay to be, I think about a good coach isn't just going to just tell you you're brilliant all the time. It's going to question you and get you to kind of think about, okay, what went well? How do you know it went well? What would you do differently next time? Let's maybe next time, what's one thing we could try differently and experiment, rather than, critics tend to be more, following rules, a bit more rigid, obviously more negative, less flexible. And we want to be able to have a different relationship, a different dialogue with this self-talk. So a lot of the kind of major third wave therapy systems or ways of training our minds, have to look at this quality of self-talk, because that's the interference, because people are having this self-talk about lots of things. I'm not ready, I'm not good enough, I just need to do another course, they won't like me, and create a delay in action. So a really, a real way of getting in the way of people's potential, of taking action, and developing a different relationship with our self-talk is a major mental skill that people need to practice.
I know, too often in the past myself, I engaged in too much negative self-talk. I was always comparing myself to other people, and in doing so, I gave the impression to myself that I wasn't good enough at anything.
Yeah.
And that's a danger. You then end up, you're in your comfort zone the whole time. You become afraid to take on a constructive challenge. Now, gladly, I've overcome that problem.
Great.
Take on a constructive challenge every day, because I want to move myself closer and closer each day to my long-term goal. So, thankfully, I've got out of that habit.
Yeah, and it's connecting to that goal, isn't it, John? It's connecting to, what it is that you truly want to be able to do, and having a connection with and moving towards that, even if the negative talk shows up.
Yeah, you need a purpose in life, effectively, is what you're saying.
Absolutely.
I agree with that. Take care of yourself like a human plant. Can you explain for the audience what this metaphor means?
Oh, I think that related to a post I did kind of recently, and I think if we think about a lot of performers or a lot of high performers, they're obsessed with sport, right? They think athletes have all the answers. But to be fair, they have some of the answers. They don't have all of the answers, and let's face it, sport has plenty of its own problems. Now, if we think about who we can learn from, we can learn from nature. We can learn from the ecosystem that might be ever present in our gardens, and actually needing to take care of it. So if we think about a plant needs certain things, doesn't it? It needs to be nourished, it needs to be watered, it needs to be in an environment that enables it to flourish. It needs food. So, we can look at things from that kind of metaphor kind of sense. I think there's a lot we can learn from gardening and using gardening as a metaphor for our mental health. And a number of authors over the years have described the mind and brain a bit like a garden, almost like an underwater kind of ecosystem that sort of, everything's sort of interconnected and has an effect on the other systems. So I think it does provide, a way of kind of looking at the natural cycles, how things ebb and flow and change and wither, and we have seasons that we are designed to rest and recover.
Very good.
All of those kind of things that make us kind of think about, we're not designed to operate like machines, and we can't always be at the top of our game. Things come and go, but a lot of these things are interrelated. If we could probably learn as much from what's in our gardens that any athlete could teach us, in all fairness.
True. And I do think if you just go back to the snooker analogy, and if you look at Mark Selby, for example, won the World Championship 3 or 4 times in Sheffield. Now, Mark, he mentioned there earlier on this year that he struggled with mental health issues. And also he had to turn professional as a young teenager because I think his father passed away.
Yeah.
And he had to provide for his family. So on the surface, having won the World Cup, the World Championship 3 or 4 times, he's been very successful and he could win it again in the near future. But that's not to say he hasn't struggled in part of his life.
Absolutely.
Nobody is perfect.
Yeah. And it's an example of how, we can train our craft. We can get very good at the technical aspect of a sport or a job, but not maybe work on ourselves. The inner development, if you like, the inner game of what it is to be a human being playing a very difficult sport in a difficult kind of lifestyle with lots of pressure and stuff. And it's quite an isolative kind of sport as well. It's or anything in life, how to deal with the trauma of losing a parent and all those things that we can't really, we don't manage that by suppressing it and pretending that everything's okay and putting on this brave face. We get better by dealing with it, and as Mark has done, he sought professional help to do that, and that's made a big difference for him to come to terms and accept what he needs to do. And I think he's been a great role model within that sport. He's obviously at the top of his game, and he's reaching out for support to address his mental health issues.
Yeah. And I think in any professional sport, whether it's snooker, soccer, rugby, for every successful athlete, there's 100 who haven't got there in the first place. They've given up along the way, or they were told it's not for you, Sonny. Move on, do something else in your life.
Yeah, we like that's go back to what you said about comparing.
Yeah.
We can get very good at things. We can improve, but there's some people we're just not going to be as good as.
Yeah.
And if we're comparing ourselves against the very best, or people who just are just that bit better than us, we're always going to come out second best. Yeah, we can continue and maybe get better at what we're doing, and we might not be able to make a living from it, but it can become like a hobby or a passion, but it might not become a scalable business, or it might not become the thing that really we have to put all our eggs in that basket. It can become part of our life, but maybe not the whole thing.
True, very true indeed. Tell the audience why we should hustle with heart.
Again, one of my RTE articles. I think there is this term hustle, like always hustling and always sort of being, what really feels like always busy, always on, grinding, and we have a lot of quote unquote productivity experts or people who've kind of, they have been enormously successful in their lives and created amazing empires. And it's almost kind of follow me, you just got to grind it out for 18 hours a day. And that leads to a culture of burnout. That some people, maybe they can do that for whatever reason, but most people can't, and they need to rest and recharge and stuff. So what I mean by heart, we can be fully engaged and we can be busy, but we need to be, be more compassionate to ourselves and what we need to do to stay well, and what we need to do to, unlock our own potential. That we aren't robots that can just work 24/7. We need to really kind of look at our well-being as essential, really, to stay productive and to be focused. So it was sort of a counter to this term that, hustle became this sort of dogma that to be successful, you have to, work in this obsessional kind of way, at the expense of your own well-being. Well, maybe you do have to work hard, but you can also work smart. And there's no evidence to support that you get better and you're more focused, after 16 hours of work. There might be some people that are hyper-focused, but that has its own downfalls too. And to be honest, I wouldn't be seeing that as a role model type that I'd be wanting to follow. I'd be wanting to have a bit more of a measured way to work. Yes, we need to fully engage and work hard, but we also need downtime and we need to recharge.
And a great example of that would be back in the late 1980s in the City of London, when there was big changes to the way the whole financial markets were, transactions took place. You had what was called yuppies working in the City of London, and they were earning big money, but there was talk about yuppie flu shortly afterwards, where people were getting burnt out, they had mental issues because there was just too much pressure put on them, and they didn't take time to look after their mental well-being, I suppose you could say. They were just under too much pressure, or they probably put too much pressure on themselves to keep making more and more money, and didn't set aside time to take a career break, to look after their mental well-being and refocus and recharge their batteries.
Absolutely, because fundamentally, John, like the brain has limits. To focus and do great work, we need to look after our brains, because it gets fatigued, and then we start losing our focus, becoming more distracted and making more irrational decisions. So we can look at business and we can think there's been some poor decision making in some big companies that have created catastrophic effects. That's
very true.
There are limits to what we can do. We certainly don't do our best work from a position of fatigue. And if we look at the kind of yuppies in London, there was a lot of substance misuse going on to as part of that sort of lifestyle. And maybe that's something you can do as a single man or single woman in your early 20s, but it has no longevity. It has no sustainability. So that's not a really good model of working, but seem to be kind of almost seen as a badge of honor.
True indeed. Can you explain for the audience why every mind needs a goalkeeper?
Yeah, so it goes back to that. So I mean, my kind of metaphor for the goalkeeper, if we think about what goalkeepers do, they protect and defend the goal. If we have a goal, there's going to be lots of competing interference with that, whether that's external or internal. So if we think about the brain, and the brain has to, it's involved in a lot of the skills that we need to be able to do every day. There was a metaphor, that I used, which is the goalkeeper, which is, the executive skills around that. So it's our ability to focus, to remember things. It's like a mental muscle for describing that, to bring that more alive. Because if your goalkeeper is sidelined, you have an exposed goal. You've got no defense. And throughout history, we've always used this metaphor of a guardian of the mind. So I've just put a bit more of a sporty kind of thing, is that we need a goalkeeper. So yeah, we need to have a goal, but we need to have some sort of defense against things like distraction, against things like doubt, against things like, getting fatigued and all that sort of stuff. And that protects the limits within the brain, if you like. So it's about bringing that more alive. So if anyone wants to read a little bit more about that, because it's so more abstract, I have written an article on LinkedIn, and it's on the website as well. So it explains about what we really mean by that. And for the clinicians out there, really, it's our executive functioning. That's what it's just putting a more of a creative term on that.
Yeah, I think what you're saying there, Peter, is that in terms of looking after your mind, obviously there's looking after your well-being, taking exercise, taking breaks, eating good food, having a good diet, but also it's being careful about who you communicate with online and in person, because the last thing you want to do is to allow other people to put negative thoughts or self-doubt into your mind. So you have to choose carefully who you speak to and what information you share with people about yourself.
Very true. Yeah, we need boundaries. Think about it. Our ancestors never had to worry about that. They didn't know what people were saying about them. They didn't have things like trolls, or they didn't have that sort of people writing about them, thinking about them. Now we've got a lot more to compete with, and we need the skills and the boundaries to be able to, to manage that.
There was an interesting article there on LinkedIn recently where I can't remember who wrote the article, but what they were saying was that a lot of people are engaging in shouting on social media. It's all about their issues, their problems, but they don't necessarily listen to what other people have to say or write about them.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of guard against that also. That's a much more recent trend, I suppose you could say.
Yeah, a lot of people who are maybe not looking at their biases and the way they think and why they think the way they do, they're just projecting that online.
Yeah, true, very true. Tell the audience your take on actions speak louder than thoughts.
Yeah, so I suppose we think about, being more what we call more psychologically flexible, being able to, observe and be with the inner experiences that we might have, with thoughts and feelings that we might have, that we need to create a little bit of distance around that. We can't just believe everything that we think, for example, because sometimes some of what we think is nonsense, to be fair, or it's negatively biased and it's inaccurate or maybe unfair. But we need to, be more able to connect to our values and take actions that are aligned with our values. So that's the things that our values are constant, they're important, they're the things that we hold near and dear. So yeah, we can be aware of thoughts, but actually being connected with our values and what are the things that we truly want, the vision for our life. We want to be able to move towards them regardless of the thoughts. Yeah. We need to be aware of them, of course, and, give it some time, like, okay, is that true? Is that helpful? Is that kind? And if it's none of those, then we think, well, okay, I need to ground myself. I need to kind of connect in with my body because my body's always in the present. I need to kind of calm myself down. And actually then what's one action I can take now that's going to move me towards what matters? Because that's the thing, that's the stuff that, makes up our life, isn't it? It's the stuff that matters. So those movements are both actions, physical actions, things that people might see us doing, but those movements are also internal. How can I be more of a coach in this moment than more of a critic? So that internal movement. So it's that movement towards what matters. So that's all about action. And, when we take action, John, that enables us to build the credibility to challenge our self-talk. Because self-talk, which is really important for confidence, is dependent on taking some action. It doesn't always mean that we achieve the desired outcome, but we do develop a kind of a distance from, just that internal dialogue and being able to say, I've been able to do difficult things. I've been able to do things at times when I've been uncertain. If we've been able to take those courageous steps of being able to take those movements, then we earn the right to be able to say to ourselves, I got this. I've been here before. I can do difficult things. Instead of just, being positive and just trying to be positive about it and try to suppress the feeling. We can acknowledge the fact that we're nervous or we're anxious or we're doubtful, but actually take action towards what matters. That's the key.
You used a key word there, values. I think particularly in Ireland, where there's so much emphasis on getting points in Leaving Cert exams to go to university, in my opinion, too many people leave school or they leave university and they go into a profession, but they're not exactly clear what their values in life are, and then they struggle. And that's something, I struggle with myself.
Sure.
Until you get clarity on your values and what's important to you as a person, it's very hard to take action.
It's so hard, John.
Achieve results that you're capable of achieving. That's the point I would make there. So I think the key word there is values.
Yeah. And if you think about it, like for me, John, like values is like my inner compass. It's kind of gives me direction. That it's not a goal. It's a sort of a life direction towards what matters. So a value could be, for example, being a good dad, or it could be creativity, or it could be kindness. And we don't want that just to be an intellectual sort of exercise. We want to be embodying that value. We want to be taking action towards that. That makes it bring alive. Values don't belong on a wall in a workshop or just a deck of cards. They want to be actioned in our life. And of course, if we don't know what they are, that's part of the inner work that needs to be done. we can sit with and reflect on questions. We can have conversations with people about what it is that is really important, how it is that I want to live my life. What does being a good dad or being a good friend or a great teammate, what does that look like? How can I embody that today? Take one step toward that. If we don't do that step, knowing our values, knowing our vision, knowing what gives us vitality, it's likely that our boundaries are going to be fuzzy, and we're going to be all over the place regards to things like self-care and consistency around the things that kind of keep us well. So that's part of the inner work that's really worth doing. And I would have conversations with people in their 40s and 50s who are equally as unsure as that school leaver, because they've just been too busy to do any of that work. They don't think that there's a value in looking at their values, or they've done some exercise in a workshop that has felt kind of meaningless, and it's like the company's values, it's not their values as a human being.
Yeah, I think what you're saying there, Peter, is there's a grave danger in not being clear on your values, because if your boundaries are fuzzy, as you mentioned there a second ago, people will see weakness in you, and particularly in the workplace, you'll get people who will use you to their benefit. They end up getting promotion, they get the pay increase, you're left behind to wallow in your own nostalgia or to have self-pity. You don't move forward, you're stuck in the past, you're not moving anywhere, you're just stuck in limbo.
Yeah,
and that's the grave danger of not knowing your values in the workplace.
Yeah, it could be quite really difficult, and you can imagine a life full of regret of things not actioned or chances not taken, or we just haven't had these experiences because we've doubted ourselves in critical moments and retreated back to our feeling of safety,
our comfort zone, effectively. Yeah. Good answer. I'm going to put you here on the spot a bit, Peter. What is the one big lesson you've learned as a professional occupational therapist over the years?
I think for me, and something that I've struggled with really, is asking for help earlier. I think that's something that we all could benefit from, sort of noticing can we notice earlier that I'm struggling a bit? And can we actually put our hands up and say, I'm actually struggling with this. I need a little bit of help. And could we seek out, whether that's somebody with a little bit more experience in our friendship network or professional network, a teammate. And I think that has been something that I've struggled with over the years. And I have to, it's almost a conscious effort for me even still to ask for help earlier. Yeah, I will do eventually. But and the person might have said, you could have asked me this weeks ago or months ago or days ago or whatever. And I think that's a challenge. I don't think it's just a male thing. I think there can be lots of people can struggle with this. And, it's a really empowering thing to actually just realize, actually, I'm going to be much more efficient. And it's going to be a win-win for everyone if I just pause here and check in with somebody and ask for help, or at least to say that I'm struggling, both in terms of just a skill that we're trying to acquire, something that we're not sure of, and of course our mental health. The earlier we seek support, the better the outcome for everybody, and the stronger our recovery will be.
Thank you for a very honest answer to a question where I put you on the spot. Well done, Peter. And on a positive note, I have a question here. Tell the audience, what does success mean for you?
Well, for me, success really means staying in connection with my values and the vision that I have for myself, even in difficult moments. And because that enables me to sort of reinvent myself and to stay connected to why I'm doing what I'm doing. For example, I left a secure pensionable job where the days were very certain, and I had a certain profile there, and then you move to the unknown where it feels very opposite to that, and you're trying to you don't have the same support systems, or you're not sure there's certainly more uncertainty. So being able to even feel successful in those kind of moments where it just doesn't look successful. It's a bit like go back to the snooker analogy, feeling like you could win before you do win, staying connected to what you have to offer, even when the results around you don't really show the fruits of your ability or the work that you're putting in. There is this time where we have to go through, which feels like we're kind of lost, and are we going in the right direction? So for me, feeling successful, even in moments where we're not visually successful, is important.
I think what you're saying there is you have to envisage success.
Yeah, embody it.
Embody it, yeah.
Yeah, like, if I'm going to make all these changes when X, Y, and Z happens, and that's great, but why can't you do some of that today? What kind of shoes you're going to wear when you're successful, or how you going to speak to people when you're successful. There's a lot of behaviors that we can sprinkle into our day, regardless of the outcome. It's about the process of success while we're pursuing a meaningful goal, and moving towards our values.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying there is, having moved from a permanent pensionable job into your own business, you have to give it time for that business to become successful. It doesn't happen overnight. You've got to develop your brand. You've got to go out there and develop your network. You've got to go out there and be clear in your own mind what service you provide, what pain point you solve for people. And you have to make yourself vulnerable to people also before they will engage with you and find you clients. So there is that uncertainty, which, as you say, you must stick with the process and believe in your own capability, and success will come your way one day.
Yeah,
happen over.
You stick at it. Yeah, it can take years, John. There's this idea that once you know what your customer wants, you'll be able to go out and sell them straight away. It can take years. There's people full of potential and full of great ability in all sorts of walks of life that it has taken them years to get to where they are now. And there might have been moments when they could have easily given up. Like a lot of entrepreneurs, think about this, people do go back to full-time employment because it's they hit a wall, or they run out of cash, or whatever. So there's a high burn rate and a high fail rate, but connection to our values and why we're doing what we're doing is really key. But creating the supports that makes it sustainable. So if it's going to take us 3 to 5 years to make that we're not sort of living life that we think we have to do it in 8 months.
Correct. You have to be a realist.
Yeah.
I agree with that. They're all great answers to the questions I've asked you today, Peter. And 3 remarkable things I can take away from this interview today, or this meeting today, is, firstly, the work of an occupational therapist is like a coach. An occupational therapist is there to open the mind of their patient or their client or their prospect to a better future. It's up to the person themselves to find those answers. And we also talked about pastimes today. I'd love to take up snooker as a pastime again, but I'd need to work on my technique. But there you go. Moving on from that, hustle with heart. It's important to achieve results in business, but it's equally important to take time out to look after our personal well-being, to take care of our diet, to take care of our minds, and to take regular exercise and keep the batteries recharged. And then finally, we talked about values today. It's important to identify what your values are and to take action that are aligned to your values. Is there anything that you want to share with the audience before I let you go?
No, I'd say that's all plenty of stuff. The only thing I'd encourage people to do is, this is all great content, but I take one thing and put it into practice. Test it out for yourself, be your own scientist, and discover your own learning by taking action.
And on that note, I'll bring today's show to an end. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
You're most welcome.